Under the leadership of President Donald J. Trump, the rogue Iranian terrorist regime is being absolutely crushed.
The president has a responsibility to make the case to the American people as to the justification for this war, but has provided no evidence that there was an imminent threat to the American people.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Wednesday evening. I'm Maritza Giorgio, guiding you through our timeline of the day's most important news, from the ongoing fallout of the war with Iran to the results of Tuesday's big primaries in Texas, North Carolina, and Arkansas. First, we started the morning with our senior international correspondent in Tel Aviv, where air sirens blared all night. We have breaking news at this hour. The Pentagon has released new video of a U.S. submarine hitting an Iranian warship with a torpedo. This happened in the Indian Ocean, and it marks the first time since World War II that the U.S. has sunk an enemy ship by torpedo. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth declared that the U.S. is winning, quote, decisively and without mercy. He did not name the ship, but the Sri Lankan Navy said it recovered 87 bodies from the sea where an Iranian warship sank. The Pentagon also released the names of 4 service members killed in this new war with Iran. The soldiers are Captain Cody Cork, Sergeant First Class Nicole Amor, Sergeant First Class Noah Tegens, and the youngest, Sergeant Declan Cody. Cody's sister says he was just months away from his 21st birthday, and now she's devastated.
I still don't fully think it's real, and I didn't think it was real when they told us, because I just remember all of our conversations about what he was gonna do when he came back. And so I'll just be sitting and thinking about it. And then, it's really hard.
Those service members killed while inside a triple-wide trailer the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth described as fortified. Family members, though, say it was an ordinary trailer with office space inside and that there was nothing to protect it from a missile or drone strike. Scripps News' senior international correspondent Jason Bellini is live with us from Tel Aviv, Israel, covering this conflict. And so, Jason, we heard a lot from the Pentagon this morning about how things are going after 4 days. Notably, we just heard from one of the troops' sisters about how hard this is, that her 20-year-old brother is now gone. And we did hear General Kane talk about how, their thoughts are with those families and they're going to bring them back home. But Secretary Hegseth was critical of the news media for focusing on those deaths. What was your biggest takeaway from that news conference?
Hi, Maritza. The most interesting thing to come out of that news conference was details on how the war just got bigger and wider, with a U.S. submarine sinking an Iranian warship off the southern coast of Sri Lanka. This is thousands of miles from the Persian Gulf. It dramatically expands Washington's pursuit of the Iranian Navy. The vessel was returning to Iran from an eastern Indian port. Now, Sri Lanka's deputy foreign minister says that at least 80 people were killed. I asked a military analyst the significance of this incident, and he said that it really sends a message to Iran that its forces are not safe anywhere because of U.S. global capabilities, Maritza.
Yeah, and Jason, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth spoke on the offensive as the U.S. military is pursuing not just on land, but on sea as well. So let's dig into that a little bit more.
He asserted today that the U.S. is quickly gaining full air superiority over Iran. This is a country that is 3.5 times the size of Texas. So taking out all of the air defenses and having full air superiority, well, that would enable the United States and Israel to then bring in the type of force that brings massive, massive firepower, dropping vertical bombs onto designated locations as they try to take out military targets and also, as we've seen, political targets. But primarily, the big hunt is on right now to take out Iranian ballistic missile sites. And it's a challenging thing to do because a lot of these ballistic missiles, they're on trucks, right? And they're in tunnels. They're hidden. So the challenge for Iran right now is when they fire them, the United States satellites see those launches the moment it happens, and then the United States knows where the target is. And so they've been taking them out and taking out ballistic missiles by sites by the hundreds, ballistic missile launchers by the hundreds. So the hope here in Tel Aviv is that lockdown will come to an end because the U.S. and Israel have been successful enough in taking out Iran's ballistic capabilities. And as we have seen, some of these ballistic missiles, they do get past air defenses. That's happened in Bahrain several times now, also in other countries, and also here in Israel a number of times. Some of these advanced rockets. So it's a hunt to take those out before they can do more damage. And from Pete Hegseth's point of view, well, they're ahead of schedule with that. That's the message that they're putting out right now, that the U.S. is winning big. Don't pay attention, back to that question about the media. So, the media is focused too much on the drone strikes that have hit embassies, that have hit U.S. bases in the Middle East. What's really important, in his estimation, is just how much the U.S. and Israel are destroying inside of Iran right now. Maritza?
Yeah, and Jason, we heard General Dan Kane say he's not going to comment on boots on the ground, that's a question for policymakers. So that's from the U.S. side. But take us into the side from Israel. There have been a lot of reports about IDF increasing its campaign against Hezbollah. So what are Israeli officials saying today about their attack and their approach here?
They're talking about boots on the ground inside of Lebanon to try to get rid of Hezbollah once and for all. I haven't heard any Israeli officials or military officials say anything about boots on the ground inside of Iran, but you bring up something that's really interesting. If you want to achieve regime change, and the Israelis make no bones about it, they want an entirely new regime they don't want a regime, they want a new leadership in Iran, one that it doesn't have an ideology that involves destroying Israel. So doing that, can you accomplish that through airstrikes alone? That's a big question. And Trump himself has said that the objective is to replace the leadership, to stop, to get rid of, in his words, having Islamist radicals running the country. So can you do that through airstrikes alone without actually getting involved in the ugly business of trying to clean things up on the ground and try to sort things the way the United States and Israel wants them sorted out on the ground? We don't know the answer to that. Right now, they're just busy taking out political targets and also military targets. Maritza?
Yeah, and Jason, also sorting out, different comments from this administration, with Secretary Hegseth saying that this is not about nation building. So we know you are following it closely for us, and we appreciate all of your work. Scripps News Senior International Correspondent Jason Bellini, live from Tel Aviv. Thank you, and stay safe. Now, let's take a quick look at some of the other major headlines from today. The Trump administration is under fire as more than 1,000 Americans remain stranded in the Middle East. And now, the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem is saying it's unable to offer assistance to Americans trying to leave. The scramble has triggered accusations and criticism from politicians on both sides of the aisle. Democratic Senator Andy Kim wrote on X, quote, "Warnings to citizens to evacuate 3 days into this war when airspace is closed is a clear sign of zero strategy and planning by the Trump administration." Meanwhile, former Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene calls this a betrayal. She says, quote, "American taxpayers are forced to give Israel $3.8 billion every single year, and here is our own U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem telling Americans, good luck getting out, you're on your own." Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the State Department is trying to organize charter flights to bring those Americans home. Today marks 99 days until the start of the 2026 FIFA World Cup in North America. Matches begin on June 11th and run through July 19th across 16 cities in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Right now, though, it is unclear if the Iranian team will participate following the recent military strikes by the U.S. and Israel. Even before the current conflict, though, the Trump administration had travel bans in place against countries like Iran. That means Iranian soccer fans would be barred from attending any games. In entertainment news, Justin Timberlake suing to block the release of police body camera footage from his drunk driving arrest in 2024. The pop star's lawyers argued that the release of the video would devastate Timberlake's privacy by revealing intimate, highly personal and sensitive details. Timberlake pleaded guilty to impaired driving in September of 2024, and police said he ran a stop sign, veered out of his lane, and got out of his BMW smelling of alcohol. And a Game of Thrones movie now in the works. It's a chance for fans to have another look at Westeros before the events of the original series. This project reportedly tells the story of the founder of the Targaryen dynasty. No word yet on when it might hit the big screen. News that Warner Brothers is in the process of being sold to Paramount Skydance, though, could throw production plans out the window. Coming up on Today As It Happened, the results are in from the first primaries of the 2026 midterms. Scripps News correspondent Stephanie Liebergen was on the ground in Texas, where confusion and tensions mounted because voters didn't know where they should go cast their ballots. Stay with us for her reporting on the high-stakes matchups in the Lone Star State after the break. And later,
you've turned our government against our people, and you've turned our people against our government.
The reason that I do this job every single day is for that, is that somebody has to do the right thing and tell the stories of these families and make sure that we don't sit around here and make political potshots on falsehoods and lies.
welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's return to our briefing of today's top stories. The 2026 midterms officially underway after Tuesday's first primary contests. Texas, North Carolina, and Arkansas all held elections here. The biggest races coming for the U.S. Senate races. So who will be the nominees when that general election comes around in November? Texas provided many of the big headlines coming out of yesterday's primary. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen joins us now from Austin, where she was on the ground for the past few days, actually tracking these elections, these primaries. So, Steph, let's first talk about what happened on the Democratic side. Two very big names in that contest for the general.
Yeah, two young names in Democratic politics and new leaders for the Democrats. And it was State Representative James Talarico versus U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett. And Talarico did indeed come out with the win. In fact, in the last couple hours, Crockett has said she officially called him to concede the election and to concede her loss. He won with about 53% of the vote last time I checked. And now he's set up to hope to break Democrats' losing streak in Texas. No Democrat has won a statewide office here since 1994. Talarico certainly going to have his work cut out from him if he thinks he can win in November. But the big question that was still looming this morning around the Democratic primary specifically is issues in Dallas County. That's Crockett's home turf. And there were reports yesterday, and those got confirmed, that voters were showing up basically at the wrong location. There were different rules for the primary this time around. So instead of being able to go to a generic vote center in their county, people had to go to their specific precinct. And sometimes the precincts were different, whether you were voting on a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot. So people were showing up in the wrong places. That caused a lot of confusions. The Democratic Party in Dallas County filed a lawsuit to keep polls open longer. A judge agreed. Polls were ordered to be open an extra 2 hours. But after that 2-hour window began, the state Supreme Court stepped in and stayed that ruling and said that those ballots, people who got in line after 7 p.m., the normal poll closing time, and then cast a provisional ballot, those ballots need to be kept aside. So they're not being thrown out or discarded, but it's unclear what exactly is going to happen with them, if or when they're going to be counted. Presumably, those Dallas County ballots would break a little bit more for Jasmine Crockett, as that's her home turf. But with her conceding this morning, Maritza, it certainly seems that she has acknowledged that she is behind far enough that she's not going to be able to catch up, even with more votes from her hometown.
All right, Steph, let's also talk about the Republican race there, because this has been a hotly contested race, really heated at times, and now we're headed for a runoff. So tell us what that looks like and what we can expect to see, how long it's going to take, and when we'll know who James Talarico will be up against.
Exactly. So the primary season not over now in Texas. It's going to be Senator John Cornyn against State Attorney General Ken Paxton in the runoff. Now, the two of them were leading the polls. They kind of went back and forth depending on which poll you were looking at, on who was in the lead by maybe 5 points or so. But because there was a third candidate, Representative Wesley Hunt, who drew a notable amount of support, neither one of them, Paxton nor Cornyn, got over 50%, which is the requirement to win outright and not have to be forced into a runoff in Texas. So Cornyn has said that this race is about character. He seems like he's going to be leaning into the scandals that have been around Paxton, who was impeached by the state legislature here. He's been facing accusations of bribery or corruption. Now he's even going through a messy divorce that is grabbing headlines here in Texas. And so Cornyn said that type of leader, if Paxton is on the top of the Republican ticket, that he's going to drag down Republicans all across the state. Take a listen.
In public polling in the last few months, U.S. Senate nominees are either tied with or beating Paxton if he were the nominee. Ken Paxton as the nominee would be a dead weight at the top of the ticket for Republicans running all across this great state.
Now, President Trump did not endorse any Republican candidates in the primary, instead saying he liked all three of them, Paxton, Cornyn, and Hunt. So we'll have to keep our eyes on the White House, Maritza, and see if President Trump weighs in this time around and puts his thumb on the scale, either for Paxton or for Cornyn. The runoff season now is 12 weeks, so there's 3 more months of campaigning for Texans ahead, 3 more months of campaign ads on TV that I'm sure local Texans might not be all that excited about, but that runoff, Maritza, happening in late May.
Well, and beyond that, then we get into the general and all of those ads too. All right, Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen live for us from Austin. Thanks so much, Steph. Just ahead on Today As It Happened, House Democrats grilled DHS Secretary Kristi Noem on the Hill Wednesday over the ICE killing of 2 Minnesotans amid the agency's immigration crackdown. Stay with us for Scripps News correspondent Katie Tubman's analysis straight ahead. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Maritza Giorgio. Let's continue our walkthrough of the day's top headlines.
Target continues to try and woo back shoppers. Another disappointing quarter. Target saying it's now revamping 130 locations with a focus on unique food selections inside its stores. The new CEO saying Target plans to spend $5 billion this year to end sluggish sales. Also working to get back customers who pulled back on when it pulled back on its DEI programs. That led to a nationwide boycott. One play, by the way, is to give 5% of its operating profits to the community. Unclear, though, what that actually looks like. The House Ethics Committee investigating Texas Congressman Tony Gonzalez. A widower alleges the Republican had an affair with one of his staffers. The woman he allegedly had that affair with committed suicide by setting herself on fire. The committee also looking into whether or not Gonzalez provided special favors and privileges. His office has not yet responded to the probe. Gonzalez has refused to resign after those allegations came to light. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem facing a second day of tough questions on Capitol Hill. This time it's the House Judiciary Committee asking the questions. Members asking about the aggressive and sometimes, yes, deadly actions of ICE. Democrats also pointing to the massive amounts of money the department is spending on advertising and travel. Scripps News national correspondent Katie Tubman live in New York now with the latest on this story. And Katie, you have been watching these hearings all day closely. What can you tell us?
That's right, Del. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was back in the hot seat today, appearing again on Capitol Hill, as you said, after being grilled in a Senate Judiciary hearing just yesterday. And today was not much different. It was another tense hearing on Capitol Hill as lawmakers clashed over how Noem's DHS is carrying out the president's deportation agenda. Here's a snapshot from the hours-long hearing.
Under Secretary Noem, fentanyl coming in the country is down, women and children are safer, and most importantly, under Secretary Noem and President Trump's leadership, the border is now secure.
You have actually turned the United States government against its own residents, and you've had multiple chances to take accountability, to apologize to these folks and others across the country, but you have failed to do it.
Now, Noem defended her department's record, touting a significant decrease in border crossings and an increase in deportations. She was joined today by angel families, that's relatives of people killed by undocumented immigrants, and she spotlighted them in her opening statements. Take a listen.
Every single day is for that. Is that somebody has to do the right thing and tell the stories of these families and make sure that we don't sit around here and make political potshots on falsehoods and lies.
Families were referenced throughout the hearing by Republicans, and also the hearing featured a lot of focus on U.S. citizens and their families, including the families of U.S. citizens who've been killed by federal agents, people like Alex Preddy and Renee Good. She was asked again, Noem, to retract comments calling them domestic terrorists while appearing before these lawmakers, and she was also asked to apologize to their families, and she offered condolences, but she didn't take back the comments, Del.
By the way, DHS is still partially shut down, and there are concerns now about security, given what's happening in Iran. Are there any signals of the DH shutdown ending?
Well, right now there aren't, and that's very clear. While the Department of Homeland Security has warned of a heightened threat environment given what is happening with ongoing strikes in Iran, Democrats say they won't give in to a push to give up their demands. They've been seeking reforms, as we know, in immigration enforcement tactics, and say that they want their reasonable requests met. Meanwhile, Republicans say this couldn't be the worst timing. Del?
Yeah, the bottom line, though, is they still maintain that DHS, or Homeland Security, is flush with cash. Scripps News national correspondent Katia Tubman live in New York for us. Katia, thank you very much.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
Iran rejected the path of peace because the terrorists in charge of this regime wanted to build nuclear weapons to use against Americans and our allies.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened, Scripps News' end of the day snapshot of our biggest stories. Let's pick up where we left off.
Under the leadership of President Donald J. Trump, the rogue Iranian terrorist regime is being absolutely crushed. 47 years of tolerating and enabling the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism are over.
Another effort today by the White House to define its goals for Operation Epic Fury, another major concern, evacuating Americans stuck in that region as the bombs continue to fall. Scripps News senior White House correspondent Haley Bull is live now on the North Lawn. And Haley, what more are we learning now about the president's thinking?
Yeah, Del, it's really a multi-layered response. The administration is declaring their operations thus far a success as we are seeing those continue to play out. And at the same time, the White House is doubling down on its explanation for the president's reasoning for launching these operations, as well as their specific goals with it. And we have seen, as this has gone on, the administration concretely define these more so. And what has really been a full court press from top administration officials the past 2.5 days. And they are outlining the objectives, as they did early on, to destroy Iran's ballistic missile program, its Navy, its support for proxy groups like the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas, as well as their ability to obtain a nuclear weapon. Now, we have heard the president say that he believed Iran would attack first, and he felt strongly about that following a diplomatic effort to try to reach a deal with Iran. But there have been a number of questions over the explanation that has been given. And the administration, we have seen over the past day, has sought to differentiate the president's reasoning for the operation with the reason for the timing in particular. Now, the administration is pointing to Iran's ballistic missile program and nuclear ambitions that they had not subsided even after operations last spring aimed at their nuclear capabilities, Dow. And they are detailing the efforts in the negotiations where they ultimately concluded that there was not a deal that could be reached with the Iranians. Now, simultaneously, Axios first reported a call last week. They reported from Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to President Trump that they report tipped him off to the Iranian Supreme Leader's meeting on Saturday with top officials. And in the White House press briefing today, the press secretary suggested that that was important when it came to the timeline of the operations, but that the president had already made a determination of his path forward, or essentially his reasoning that Iran was not going to be able to reach a deal, that they were going to strike in his view.
Haley, did the White House provide an update on getting Americans out of the region? Many of them saying they're sheltering in place and concerned about the bombs that are falling.
Yeah, Del, this is a really important question. The administration is saying that since the start of the operation, more than 17,000 Americans have been returned. They are encouraging people to register with the State Department, to call their hotline, which they say has now been updated. As those people who are looking to evacuate the region call in there, they are now chartering flights, they say, and booking commercial options where available. The press secretary also saying that the president and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have been in touch with other allies about this issue as well. Of course, they are facing questions on the timeline of this evacuation plan, as we have seen this play out over the last couple days, and they are defending how they proceeded with that. The White House press secretary saying this.
I just laid out for you that there have been plans in place and that the State Department has been very clear to the American people traveling within this region not to travel to these regions. We gave notices to leave immediately the countries where these Americans were within. And unlike the previous administration, we actually have a number. We actually have identified the number of people in the region who have requested help. We are in direct contact and engagement with them. And you have to keep in mind, there's a few thousand people who have requested assistance to come home in comparison to the millions who we understand are in the region. So we will help every single American who wants to come home if they're making that request of the State Department.
Our senior White House correspondent Haley Bowforce live on the North Lawn. Haley, thank you very much. Lots of activity also on Capitol Hill. The Senate planning to vote today on a resolution to limit President Trump's war powers without congressional approval. That measure will test loyalty among Republicans who once were on board with the president who said he wanted to keep America out of what he called forever wars. Scripps News senior congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed is live on Capitol Hill. And Nate, what is the argument from Republicans against the war powers resolution?
The concern here, Del, is that this would handcuff the president and prevent him from taking the offensive action needed to win this conflict. That's something that many Republicans up here on Capitol Hill have said that they have concerns with. They appear to be on track to defeating this resolution to prevent the president from continuing this power in Iran. Earlier today, Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, a close confidant of President Trump, someone who's been advocating for this military action for quite some time, saying that he believes that Congress still does have a say here, just one further down the line, that they should not take this action to effectively kneecap the president from being able to try and get to the U.S.'s stated objective here, which is government change in Tehran. Take a listen.
You don't have to authorize military operations. They can go on as long as the president wants them to go on until you cut off funding. You can only have one commander-in-chief. We've had military operations that were not authorized. Most of them are not. And as a member of Congress, you don't like it, cut off funding. That's what you could do. If you don't want to continue after 4 or 5 weeks, say no money. That's the only thing we can do. We can't become commander-in-chief. So, yeah, I don't know how long it'll go. To me, it's not about how long it goes, it's how it ends.
And already, Del, there are whispers up here on Capitol Hill about the need for additional supplemental funding to pay for this ongoing war, depending on how long it stretches. Some Republicans telling us that they believe it'll be over sooner than most people think. At the same time, the Trump administration not ruling out putting boots on the ground or any sort of timeline for how long this conflict will last. Also, I hesitate to call it a war, as Congress has not declared war. That is the sole power of Congress alone. At this point, they've called it armed hostilities or other things. As you heard earlier the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, also known as the Secretary of War, at least identified by the Trump administration, has said that this is a war. Again, a lot of questions up here on Capitol Hill about rushing to call it a war. One Republican senator telling me earlier when I asked him if Congress should take that vote on declaring war, his answer was maybe. It doesn't look like this war powers effort is going to pass. Beyond war powers, what can Democrats in Congress do to prevent this conflict from continuing to escalate?
Look, we have to see whatever we can do in terms of funding, stopping the funding, see whatever legislative options are, but also just talking about this. The president would love nothing more for this war to continue quietly because he doesn't, again, have an end strategy, end goal. And I think it's important that we continue to remind this country that we are at war. Men and women have put their lives at risk, and we're going to have severe consequences of this, especially when this president has no end plan about how we're going to get out of this.
And that's largely been the message that we've heard from Democrats so far, Del, this belief that if this war powers vote fails, which it appears to be on track to fail once that vote begins in the next hour or so, that the next step that Democrats can take up here on Capitol Hill is one of advocacy, trying to push this to the forefront, keep this message up, and try and get the public to weigh in and indicate their opposition to this ongoing hostility with, no end in sight. Again, there'll be a big opportunity for the public to weigh in about the future direction, possibly of this conflict and the rest of the country with the midterm elections later this year, Del. At the same time, Democrats acknowledging effectively that they're limited in what they can do, some advocating for kind of a no-holds-barred approach of preventing any action on any bills on the Senate floor, for example, until President Trump gives them more clear objectives and a more clear game plan in Iran. At the same time, there's only so much the Democrats can do in the minority. Republicans in Congress largely have backed President Trump in this conflict and, are okay with the fact that he has not ruled out the possibility for boots on the ground and not given them a precise timeline for how long this military operation will last.
Nate, the war powers vote, unlikely to succeed, war powers, which is fascinating. Is there much the Democrats can do in the minority to prevent a full-out war? And will the Trump administration actually need authorization from Congress at some point to write those checks?
Yeah, that's kind of the next major question. There's only so much Democrats can do, as I just noted. But look, the fact that they might need additional funding for an ongoing conflict with Iran, that is where Democrats might next have leverage if the Trump administration comes back to Congress and says, hey, we need money for these ongoing hostilities. That's an area where Democrats could possibly, use some of their leverage. Remember, you need bipartisan support for the most part on most legislation to get it through Congress and to the president's desk. If they need Democratic votes to continue this fight, to refund the military, to pay for the loss of munitions, additional munitions, or just cover the extreme cost of going to war, then likely Congress will have to have a say, have to weigh in. Up to this point, the administration not sending that additional funding to Congress, also not asking Congress to formally make that declaration of war at this point.
Hey, Nate, has anybody reminded Congress that the president and the defense secretary are both calling it a war?
Look, I mean, the semantics up here are pretty fascinating. Yesterday, Republican senators, some of them stumbling over words about whether this is a war or armed hostilities. Again, the president has been fairly clear here, and the Secretary of Defense, the Trump administration calls the Secretary of War, that this conflict in Iran is a war. At the same time, Republican senators kind of loath to say that up here on Capitol Hill, calling it hostilities, refraining from using the war word because that still is their power, Del. It is only Congress's power to declare war. They have not taken a vote. They have not done so since, of course, the war in Iraq way back after the September 11th attacks on America.
Yeah, a reminder that Russia is still in year 4 of its special military operation in Ukraine. Scripps News senior congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed for us on Capitol Hill. Nate, as always, we thank you.
Straight ahead on Today as It Happened.
America's war with Iran already producing higher gas prices. I'm Maura Barrett. Coming up, why the conflict has impacted oil supplies and how high a gallon of gas might get.
Thanks for joining us again on Today as It Happened. I'm Marisa Giorgio with your daily look at the day's biggest stories.
Checked on gas prices lately. President Trump's decision to launch those military strikes against Iran, throwing the global oil markets into a tizzy, sending gas prices higher and adding new concerns about an already fragile U.S. economy. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett is live for us in Denver. And Mara, what is the latest when it comes to our access to oil and the price of gas?
Well, Del, it's been a swift shift and an increase that we've seen just in the last 7 days. The average cost of a gallon of gas is up to more than 20 cents more since the conflict began, according to AAA. They have the national average sitting at about $3.19. Obviously, that can be more expensive in more high-density areas or along the coast. And a big reason for that centers on this narrow strip of water that borders Iran. It's called the Strait of Hormuz, and that separates the Persian Gulf from the Indian Ocean. It's a key player when it comes to trade, and about 20% of the world's oil supply moves through that passage every single day. However, since the start of the war, several ships have been attacked in the Strait of Hormuz and tankers have been threatened if they pass through, and so this has effectively shut down this key passageway. And so because of that, the price of a barrel of oil is up more than 10% just since the weekend, sitting between $75 and $85 a gallon. So that's why we've seen the individual gallons of gas go up. Analysts are anxious that the price of a barrel of oil could go up as high as $100 a barrel, which then could push the price of gas to about $4 a gallon. And remember, President Trump, the price of gas was the one thing he was able to brag about at the State of the Union accurately, in which we had seen prices come down in the last year. Everything else in terms of inflation and affordability and cost of living issues are still on the rise. And so when you add in increasing gas prices, there's even more anxiety for the average American who's struggling to pay costs. Now, President Trump did try to downplay all of this just yesterday, saying that as soon as the conflict ends, the prices are going to be even lower than they were before. Obviously, there's no details in terms of the timeline, all of this, or the reality of how long it will take gas prices to rebound. The president did later say that he is promising political risk insurance for ships that are traveling through the Gulf. He talked about U.S. Navy escorts for tankers that are moving through the strait to ensure that they are able to deliver the oil that they're carrying. And so when we're talking about speculation in terms of how high prices could go, it's really important to look at some of the recent history. When Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2022, gas prices did jump nearly $1 in just 30 days, in a little less than a month. But then after last year's June strike on Iran, prices actually fell in the following 45 days. And so ultimately, it does really come down to the Strait of Hormuz and whether oil can move safely through it. And that can determine how much longer drivers or any other uses for gas is felt at the pump, Del.
You know, Mar, it's not just about gas. Can you break down the other economic effects and what other commodities are we talking about, and also inflation in general?
I mean, ultimately, you have to think about the industries that are associated with gas, right? Whether it's airlines and plane tickets that could be going up because they're seeing higher costs of fuel as well, but then also just shipping in general, whether it's your Amazon deliveries or groceries or other commodities, everything requires fuel to get from point A to point B, right? And so ultimately, as we know, the way supply and demand works, those costs just trickle down through these other commodities that people need, whether you're at the grocery store or the mall, if you're shopping online. Depending on how long this goes on, it could have a big impact. One that I found particularly interesting is the price of fertilizer, right? Because this also has a trickle-down effect. 25 to 35% of the U.S.'s need for fertilizer comes through that same passageway, the Strait of Hormuz, and farmers now are increasingly anxious about how high their fertilizer costs are going to be and how that impacts their potential profit margins. I want to hear from one Virginia farmer who thought about this immediately after he heard about the conflict.
I actually talked to our guy that we buy fertilizer from and told him to hustle and bustle and get us loaded up with fertilizer before the prices increase. The price of fertilizer, as it goes up, our profit margins go down. We get paid per bushel when we sell our crops, and the government obviously details what we get as far as that coming in goes, but our fertilizer companies and fuel companies, they determine, our pricing going out, so it makes it really hard for us to make any kind of profit at all.
So again, there could be a potential direct impact on the cost of food in the grocery store that is grown by those farmers that need the fertilizers. And so there ultimately is just always going to be this domino effect on top of an already tough year when it comes to inflation and affordability for the president. Del.
Yeah, it's amazing. Farmers now treating the supply chain issues just like we saw big business do when the tariffs came. And also on the subject of tariffs, I think that 15% tariff across the board went into effect today. So welcome to the new reality. Our business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett for us live in Denver. Mara, thank you very much.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
Somebody said, on a scale of 10, where would you rate it? I said about a 15. And we're going to continue to do well. We have the greatest military in the world by far.
You're watching Today as It Happened, Scripps News' recap of the day's biggest events. Let's dive right in.
We're doing very well on the war front, to put it mildly, I would say. Somebody said, on a scale of 10, where would you rate it? I said about a 15. And we're going to continue to do well. We have the greatest military in the world by far.
A United Nations Human Rights panel strongly condemning those U.S.-Israel airstrikes against Iran, saying they violate the UN Charter, leaving civilians caught in the crossfire. The panel pointing to strikes that hit schools in Iran, killing at least 175 people, most of whom were students. More than 780 people have been killed in those strikes against Tehran. It is now day 5 of the U.S. war with Iran. Moments ago, Israel saying it launched another wave of airstrikes against Tehran. The IDF now saying it has struck 200-plus targets in the Iranian capital. Scripps News senior international correspondent Jason Bellini is live for us on the ground in Tel Aviv. And Jason, the biggest news of the day seemed to happen on the high seas. What can you tell us about the U.S. sub sinking an Iranian warship?
That's right, Del. The war just got bigger and wider. A U.S. submarine sinking an Iranian warship off the southern coast of Sri Lanka, thousands of miles from the Persian Gulf, dramatically expanding Washington's pursuit of the Iranian Navy. The vessel was returning to Iran from an eastern Indian port. Sri Lanka's deputy foreign minister said that at least 80 people were killed. I asked a top military analyst the significance of this incident, and he said it sends a message to Iran that its forces are not safe anywhere because of U.S. global capabilities. We also learned today the U.S. has sunk 20 Iranian Navy warships, though.
And Jason, how is the U.S. trying to achieve air superiority? That seems to be the focus of the effort so far.
We've got Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth asserting today that the U.S. is quickly gaining full air superiority over Iran. This is a country that's 3.5 times the size of Texas, but the U.S. and Israel do not yet have total dominance. As the chairman of the Joint Chiefs explained it, U.S. aviators are still in a standoff posture, and that means they're mostly firing missiles and rockets from a distance. The fighter jets are firing them from a distance, but once air dominance is achieved, that's when the fighters and bombers fly directly over targets and begin hitting them with super heavy precision gravity bombs. And today, the Defense Secretary said America's supply of those is nearly unlimited, Del.
Scripps News senior international correspondent Jason Bellini live for us on the ground in Tel Aviv. Jason, as always, stay safe.
Thanks for spending part of your evening with Today as It Happened. I'm Maritza Giorgio. Have a wonderful Wednesday night.